there were 0 new insider trades filed because the SEC was closed for Columbus Day. So instead, let's take a look at a high signal insider trade archetype, the momentum purchase, and we'll look at a CEO purchase at Kratos Defense as a case study and how we can gather data to identify it as a high signal momentum purchase. So let's head over to CEOwatcher.com and we'll take a look at Kratos Defense. So we'll go to KTOS. We're going to scroll down here to the most recent purchase, which was Eric DeMarco, president and CEO at Kratos Defense. As we can see, if we look over the time frame here, he had made a couple purchases earlier in this year that we were able to identify as high signal purchases, and we'll go through how we were able to do that. But first, let's take a look at his history. He hadn't bought the stock since 2018, though the stock is obviously way up since then. We can take a look at those purchases way back there, buying at $10, $11, and $12, and then the stock just cruised on its way up to $23 in the next year. So obviously a very, very good track record of purchases back here. High win rates, or good win rates, and good insider returns as well. Then doing just all sorts of selling from basically 2020 to 2022. And then finally in 2024 decided to buy the stock again for the first time with a couple of purchases in August of 2024, right at like the $21 range. Again, stock went from $21 up to about $35 there in the next 6 months or so before this small dip at the start of 2025. And then this is what we will take a look at here is the start of 2025, where now this first purchase in this March purchase, you might have identified as a high signal purchase because obviously the CEO here had a great track record of insider purchases before. You also had the Trump administration coming in, which is very pro-defense, and then Kratos is a Kratos Defense, and we can take a quick look at just what exactly they do, but they are a technology company providing technology products and system and software for defense, national security, and commercial markets in the United States and some other places. They have the Kratos Government Solutions and the Unmanned Systems are their 2 segments. They offer ground systems for satellites, space vehicles, including software for command and control, telemetry, tracking control, jet-powered unmanned aerial drone systems, hypersonic vehicles, rocket systems, propulsions for drones, missiles, etc. So, the main things here being like drones and rockets, and they're obviously a very big defense company. So then we can take a look here, and the Trump administration came in. The Trump administration definitely very pro-defense. So you could have made the argument here when you combine that with the fact that Eric DeMarco here, the CEO, has a killer track record. You might have still thought this was a high signal trade here and bought the stock. But for the sake of this case study, we're actually going to take a look at this purchase here that was filed on May 12th. He bought $250,000. The stock is obviously up 180% since then. But this was very clearly a high signal purchase, and it was a momentum purchase because we had positive price momentum. The stock was already at $26 and had gone up to $34. So the stock was up 25-30% or so already in the last couple months since his previous purchase. It also was not trading cheap at all, which we can go see over here in the historical graphs. If we take a look right around that May timeframe, let's just get it right here. So this is about May where this dotted line is, and we can see that it's trading EV, any multiple you want to use, it's pretty expensive. Probably like EV/EBITDA makes the most sense, trading at a 41x, which is well above its mean. Even if you want to use EV sales, it was trading at somewhere, 3.5 over 2x its mean. If you're looking at even that PE ratio is trading a little above its average. So most insider purchases that are high signal are going to fall more in the short-term dip buy, a long-term turnaround, which is still the stock price is way down, or just a value play where the stock is undervalued. Obviously, this is not the case for any of those. The stock was on a tear. It had been up 27% or so in the last, move this to a year, it had been up 27% or so in the last couple of months. Well, very positive momentum, and then very expensive as well. So clearly this has to be a momentum play. So then we want to look through some things and identify how we can identify this as a high signal momentum play. The first thing is just that the CEO has a killer track record. So solely from an insider trading perspective, it's a very high signal insider purchase. But we want to go craft maybe a more holistic story around why this momentum is likely to continue. And the start of that story is obviously just the Trump administration being very pro the defense industry. And even actually before the March purchase, even you had started to see some news come out about some contracts and stuff that Kratos was signing. But specifically looking before that May purchase, we actually saw, well, this one actually came out before the March purchase as well, but we started to see news stories coming out, news articles like global shift in government policies incentivizing U.S. manufacturing for drone manufacturers. So you saw drones, and then they mentioned Kratos specifically, and they mentioned a couple other drone companies, which I believe most of these worked out quite well as well. But so you're starting to see, the Trump administration is pro-defense. You're starting to see news articles come out that mention the government policies are actually incentivizing drones specifically, which then is even more beneficial for Kratos Defense. You then have a month later, you have the White House coming out with a press release / just an executive order that Donald Trump signed, which was about modernizing defense defense acquisitions and spurring innovation in defense industrial base. And they're specifically talking about trying to eliminate unnecessary regulations and promote expedited and streamlined acquisitions. They're trying to get them to speed up how frequently and how much the contracts they're signing with some of these defense, getting better defense, military weapons, strengthening our military edge is kind of their whole thing. So, I mean, it's just very clear the government is very, very focused on the defense industry in general and putting money behind it and a focus on it. So, you have that huge macro tailwind of just the US government being behind it. You get the news coming out specifically focused on drones, which is positive for Kratos. And then looking at Kratos specifically, we can go to Kratos' newsroom here. And if we go back to the beginning of 2025 and just start to look through all of the contracts they're signing, you start to see momentum as well in just the number and the amount and the size of all these contracts that they're signing with the Department of Defense. So you see, I mean, all the way back in January, they got a $35 million contract for Valkyrie missiles. They were able to also get, and then it actually starts to speed up. So some of these were before March, but you'll start to see it speed up as we scroll through here. Just before that March purchase by the CEO, they got a $59 million contract signed with the total contract, or an additional $60 million. So total contract now exceeding $175 million. They then had another $50 million, which this one was about the same time as that March purchase. Another $50 million short to medium range suborbital vehicle contract. The March 17th, the Naval Air Systems, a follow-on contract for another $19 million. We still have multiple pages to go through before we even get to where we're at now, but then you have $50 million, not really a contract here, but if you read into this, it was with the government, or some deals with the government going on in here, but not quite exactly what we care about right now. Another $30 million sole source air defense system award with the Department of Defense. Anything else here? Was there another one? I thought there might have been one more before May came out, but maybe it was just this one. So then or just this one down here, this $30 million award here. So you can also just see we have all sorts of contracts coming out with the government. So it's very clear, not only is the government very focused on this, but Kratos is going to be a big part of that as the government is handing them all sorts of, or, the Department of Defense is handing them all sorts of contracts. If you go and read the earnings calls, the transcripts for any of these earnings calls, or go listen to any of them, you also hear that they're obviously very bullish on the momentum and Kratos' place in the Department of Defense spending, spree that they're going to go on. Kratos believes they will be a very large part of that, and then obviously all of these contracts that they're signing show that to be the case. So I think this is just very clearly, you can quickly identify this as a potential momentum play when you go look at some of the valuation stuff and you're like, hey, the stock price is way up, these valuations are high, this is clearly not a dip buy, clearly not a turnaround, clearly not a value play, it has to be a momentum play. So then your question becomes, okay, what will maintain this momentum? You have the benefits of the fact that the CEO is just a very high quality signal. He buys the stock. When he buys the stock tends to go way up. So that by itself is a huge signal right there. But then obviously you have all of the news, you have the tailwinds, the macro tailwinds of the government being focused on the defense industry, and then the specific tailwinds of Kratos winning a lot of these defense contracts, and you see those start to pick up in the beginning of the year, which obviously bodes very well for that momentum to continue. And then obviously this purchase was back here, May 12th, which even if you bought it at the open on May 13th, it's gone now from 34.46 to 96.28 over 34.46. So 179% returns in 6 months or 5 months, whatever that is. Nothing too shabby there. And then obviously your play now is just kind of deciding. You could play it purely as a momentum play, right? And you might use, in this case, you might use whatever you want, the 50-day, 200-day, it doesn't matter. And you could just say, hey, as long as the stock price is above that, I'm just going to hang on. Maybe 50-day makes the most sense here just because there's such a huge gap down to the 200-day. Or you could just use it in terms of, you could just stay up to date on their earnings calls and just see, as long as they're continuing to beat top line numbers and win government contracts, that's really what matters the most, and the stock will likely continue to go up. So you could play either way, but identifying as a momentum play, one, helps you just realize what info you need to go find, and then it also helps you decide how you're going to play it, either strictly on technicals by just buying, as it sits above whatever moving average you want to use, or, just paying attention to like, hey, as long as they keep winning government contracts, this is going to, and the revenue keeps going up, this is going to look pretty good. And then you can just follow along with the press releases and the earnings calls that way. So this is just a very good example of a momentum play. Another one more recently, which we just talked about a couple weeks ago, which I'm sure all of you guys know and has been on a tear, is the United States Antimony Corporation, which is a similar-ish situation where you have the stock up a ton. If we look, it's the CEO buying the stock again. The stock up a ton, in this case up way more, 400% in the last 6 months, which is just insane. The CEO had bought the stock previously, pretty good historic returns, though actually this stock, he had bought it at down here at like $1.67 and then bought it again at $6. So obviously in that case, very good returns. If you go way back here, his returns weren't actually quite as good. So the signal from the CEO himself was not as good in this case, not as good of a timing of his insider buys as the CEO at KTOS. However, in this case, you had the stock was obviously on a massive tear, which we won't look too much through this, but the stock was obviously on just an absolutely insane tear, up 2,300% in the last year, which that's with this bump. It was at the time that we found that trade on October 1st, the stock was around $7, and so it was only quote unquote up 800% in the last year, but still, not many people are buying 800%. Stocks are already up 800% tends to spook a lot of us off. However, this is a rare earth company, rare earth minerals. You've got the whole China situation going on, but the U.S. government have been very, very focused on rare earth minerals. This stock had obviously been on a tear. They were projecting revenue to double over the next year. They had just signed some government contracts. They had just gotten regulation signed off, or whatever you want to call it, in Alaska that they had been working on, so they were able to do their work they needed to do in Alaska. So all of this is just another case of like, okay, huge tailwinds from the government. They're also from the government overall, and they're focused on rare earth minerals. Huge tailwinds for United States Antimony Corp as they're winning a lot of these government contracts, and they don't expect that to slow down based on their guidance for next year. And then they also were able to sign the whatever with Alaska that I'm trying to, the regulation. They got signed off on the permits they need. That's the word I'm looking for. They had their permits signed off in Alaska, which was another positive. So again, just the story around it is very, very strong for the momentum, for why that momentum will continue. And now this stock is has gone from $7 to $16.69 in literally 2 weeks since we mentioned it in the October 1st email. So, and the October 1st video, I'm pretty sure I talked about it as well. So that is a specific type of archetype. That momentum archetype is one that we pay attention to. Most of the time we're looking for more value plays, turnaround plays, dip buys, and that kind of thing. But the one case where we don't look at that is with these momentum plays. Stocks already going up a ton, the fundamentals going up very well, and then trying to craft a story for why that's going to continue. So two great examples here with KTOS and United States Antimony Corporation. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time.